The phone rang in the darkness. 2:04 a.m. A tired man picked up. "Dad, please, I need help." A trembling female voice. Then silence. He looked around his empty room, grabbed his jacket, and drove out into the pouring rain. At the end of a deserted alley, he found a car with a flat tire. A young woman sat inside panicking. "You called me. I thought I called my father." He smiled softly. "Guess the universe rerouted your call." She had no idea that this night would change both their lives forever. Jack Rowan was 38 years old, a single father, a night shift roadside assistance driver. But once upon a time, he had been a military engineer. Sharp, skilled, respected. That was before his wife left, before he became the only parent his 9-year-old daughter Lila had ever really known. Now his life was simple. Wake up, make breakfast, drop Lila at school, sleep a few hours, pick her up, help with homework, tuck her in, then drive through the city's darkest hours, helping strangers who found themselves stranded. Lila always told him the same thing before bed. "Daddy, helping people is your superpower." He would smile and kiss her forehead. "Then I guess I'm a superhero who drives a tow truck." She would giggle every single time. On his dashboard, he kept a helmet, an old one from his military days, covered in stickers. One of them read, "Lila's dad." She had put it there herself. He never took it off. Isabella Voss was 28, an heiress to the Voss Group, one of the largest financial empires in the country. Her face appeared in magazines. Her name opened doors. Her bank account had more zeros than most people could count, but none of it felt like hers. It all belonged to her father, Richard Voss, a man who built empires but never learned how to build a relationship with his daughter. Her mother had passed away when Isabella was 12. After that, her father threw himself into work. And Isabella? She became another asset, another piece on his chessboard. Tonight she had run. There had been an engagement party, a grand one, held at the Voss estate, champagne, classical music, a man she barely knew standing beside her, smiling like he had already won. Her father had arranged it all, a merger disguised as a marriage. "This is good for the company," he had said. "You'll understand one day." She did not want to understand, so halfway through the speeches, she slipped out the back, got in her car, and drove. No plan, no destination, just away. The rain started an hour later. Heavy, blinding. Her tires were old. She had been meaning to replace them. But when you grow up with people who handle everything for you, you forget how to handle things yourself. The pop was loud. The car swerved. She pulled over, hands shaking. She sat there in the dark, rain hammering the roof, and realized she had no idea what to do. So she called the only person she thought might care, her father. But her fingers were trembling. The screen was wet, and she misdialed. Jack had been parked outside a gas station when the call came in. He almost ignored it. Unknown number, late hour, probably a prank. But something in the voice stopped him. "Dad, please, I need help." Young, afraid, real. He sat up. "Hello? Are you okay?" The line went dead. He stared at the screen, tried calling back. No answer. Most people would have shrugged it off. Wrong number. Not my problem. But Jack was not most people. He thought of Lila. He thought of all the nights he prayed someone would help her if she ever needed it, and he was not there. So he checked the call log, pulled up the location tracker on his dispatch system, found the nearest ping to that number, and he drove, through the rain, through the empty streets, until he saw the car on the side of the road. Hazard lights blinking weakly. He pulled up behind it, grabbed his helmet, and walked over. A young woman sat inside, soaked and shaking. He tapped on the window. She looked up. "You called me," he said. "Subscribe so you don't miss what happens when a wrong number changes 2 lives." She rolled down the window slowly. Her eyes were red, mascara smudged, hair damp from the rain. "You called me," Jack said again, keeping his voice calm. She blinked, confused. I thought I called my father." He glanced at the flat tire, then back at her. "Well, I'm not him. But I'm here, and that tire isn't going to fix itself. She hesitated, then nodded. He got to work immediately. No questions, no judgment, just action. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the ground was soaked. His knees pressed into the mud as he loosened the bolts. She stood a few feet away, arms wrapped around herself, watching. "You didn't have to come," she said quietly. "It was a mistake." He looked up, smiled. "Good thing I make mistakes too." She almost laughed. Almost. He worked quickly, efficiently, the way someone does when they have done something 1,000 times before. When he tightened the last bolt, he stood and wiped his hands on his jeans. "All set," he'd said. "But you should get those tires checked soon. This one's a spare. Won't last long." "Thank you," she said. Her voice was softer now, steadier. That is when he noticed her hand, a cut along her palm, small but bleeding. "You're hurt," he said. She glanced down. "Oh, I must have cut it on something when I got out." He walked back to his truck and returned with a first aid kit. "Let me see." She hesitated again, but something about him made her feel safe. So she held out her hand. He cleaned the wound carefully, wrapped it in gauze. His hands were rough but gentle. "You do this a lot?" she asked. "Fix cars or fix people?" "Both," he smiled. "Comes with the bow and the dad territory." "You have kids?" "A daughter, Lila. She's 9, probably dreaming about dragons and homework right now." Isabella smiled for the first time that night. A real smile. "She's lucky," Isabella said, "to have someone who shows up." Jack finished wrapping her hand. "I think we all need someone who shows up." The rain started again, heavier this time. "You should wait it out," he said. "Not safe to drive in this." She looked at the sky, then at him. "Where?" He nodded toward his truck. "Not fancy, but it's dry." They sat in the cab of his truck. The rain drummed against the roof. He pulled out a thermos from under the seat and poured coffee into the lid. "Not fresh," he said, "but it's warm." She took it, wrapped both hands around it. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a moment, a comfortable one. Then she spoke. "Why do you do this? Help strangers at 2 in the morning?" He leaned back, thought about it. "Because someone helped me once, when I needed it most." "Who?" "A guy I never saw again. I had just gotten out of the military. Lost. No job. No direction. My wife had left. I was sitting in my car outside a grocery store trying to figure out how I was going to feed my daughter. And this guy knocked on my window. Gave me $50. Told me, pass it forward when you can." Then he walked away. Isabella stared at him. "Did you ever find him?" "No, but I found 100 other people who needed help. So I figured that was close enough." She looked down at her coffee. "My mom used to say something like that. She said the universe always sends the right person at the right time. You just have to be paying attention." Sounds like a smart woman. She was. Isabella's voice cracked. "She died when I was 12. After that, my father, he just stopped being a father. He became a CEO, and I became another board member." Jack watched her carefully. "That why you ran tonight?" She nodded. "He's marrying me off to some businessman I barely know. Says it's good for the company, like I'm a contract, not a person." Jack exhaled slowly. "That's not okay." "No, it's not." She looked at him. "But no one else seems to care." "I care." The words hung in the air, simple, honest. She felt something break inside her chest, not in a painful way, in a way that felt like relief. "Why?" she whispered. "You don't even know me." He shrugged. "Don't need to. You called for help, and I believe people who ask for help deserve to get it. No questions, no conditions." She felt tears sting her eyes. She blinked them away. They sat there until the rain softened, until the sky started to lighten just a little. When it was safe to drive, she stood by her car. He was already back in his truck. "Wait," she called out. He rolled down his window. Can I have your number, in case I need help again?" He smiled, but he shook his head. It was a wrong call, remember? "But if you need help, you'll find me, or I'll find you, that's how it works." And then he drove away. She stood there in the rain, alone, but somehow not lonely anymore. 2 days passed. Jack went back to his routine. Lila, school, work, sleep, repeat. But something felt different. He kept thinking about the woman in the rain. Her eyes, the way she held that coffee cup like it was the only warm thing in her world. He wondered if she was okay, if she had gotten home safely, if she had stood up to her father. But he did not have her number, and she did not have his. That was probably for the best, he told himself. People like her did not stay in the lives of people like him. On Tuesday afternoon, his phone buzzed. A new work order. VIP client, full vehicle inspection and maintenance. Address 2247 Lakewood Estate Drive. He raised an eyebrow. Lakewood Estate, that was the wealthy side of town. Gated community, old money. He had been there once or twice before. Rich people with expensive cars they barely drove. Easy job. Good tip. He would take it. He loaded his tools, told Lila he would be home by dinner, and drove out. The estate was massive, stone gates, fountain in the driveway, the kind of place that looked like it belonged in a movie. A butler answered the door. Actually, a butler. Jack almost laughed. "Mr. Rowan?" the man asked. "That's me. Right this way." Jack followed him through a marble hallway, paintings on the walls, chandeliers overhead. He felt out of place in his work boots and grease-stained jacket. They reached the garage. 3 cars, all spotless, all worth more than his annual salary. "The client will be with you shortly," the butler said. Then he left. Jack set down his toolbox and waited. Footsteps echoed from the hallway. He turned and froze. Isabella stood in the doorway. Her hair was pulled back. She wore a simple sweater and jeans. But her eyes, those same eyes, she froze too. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she smiled, slow, warm, a little shy. "So," she said softly, "it wasn't a wrong call after all." Jack blinked, then laughed. A real surprised laugh. You set this up?" She sprayed closer. "I told you, if I needed help, I'd find you. Or you'd find me." "I didn't think you meant it like this." "I'm full of surprises." He shook his head, still smiling. "You could have just asked for my number." "You said no, remember?" "Fair point." They stood there, the tension melting into something lighter, something easy. "So," Jack said, nodding at the cars, "which one needs work?" "None of them." He raised an eyebrow. "Then why am I here?" She hesitated, then said, "Because I wanted to see you again, and I didn't know how else to do it." His heart did something strange, something he had not felt in years. "Isabella, I know, it's weird, but I haven't stopped thinking about that night, about what you said, about showing up, and I realized no one's ever just shown up for me, not without wanting something." Jack set down his wrench. "I don't want anything." "I know. That's why I wanted to see you again." She invited him inside, offered him coffee. Real coffee this time. Not from a thermos. They sat in her living room, huge windows overlooking a garden. Everything perfect. Everything cold. "This is where you live?" he asked. "This is where I exist," she corrected. He understood. They talked. About everything, about nothing. She asked about Lila. He told her stories. She laughed, really laughed. Then she grew quiet. "Jack, I need to tell you something." He leaned forward. "What's wrong?" "That night, the night I called you, I wasn't just running from a party." "What do you mean?" "My father, he didn't just arrange an engagement. He hired people to make sure I went through with it." Jack's jaw tightened. "What kind of people?" "Security, watchers. I don't know what else to call them. After I left the party, I thought I was free. But they followed me. I saw the headlights. That's why I was panicking. That's why I pulled over." Jack felt something cold settle in his chest. "And then what?" "Then you showed up, and they left." He stared at her. "They left? Just like that?" She nodded. "I think they didn't expect anyone to stop, especially not someone like you, someone who looked like they could handle themselves." Jack exhaled slowly. "Isabella, that's not okay. That's, I know." Her voice cracked. I know, but what can I do? He controls everything. My money, my life, the company. If I fight him, I lose everything. But you keep yourself, Jack said firmly. She looked at him, eyes shining. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. She wiped her eye. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You called for help at 2 in the morning. You ran from a life you didn't want. You tracked me down because you wanted to see me again. He leaned closer. You're stronger than you think. She smiled through her tears. You really believe that? I know it. A voice cut through the moment. How touching. They both turned. A man stood in the doorway. Tall, gray hair, expensive suit, cold eyes. Richard Voss. Isabella stood quickly. Father, he ignored her. His gaze locked on Jack. And who is this? Jack stood too, calm, steady. Jack Rowan, I'm here to service the vehicles. Richard's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. Is that what we're calling it now? Dad, stop. Sit down, Isabella. No. Richard's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? I said no. Her voice was shaking, but she did not sit. Richard turned his attention back to Jack, looked him up and down. Let me guess. Military background, blue-collar work, single father. Jack did not flinch. That about sums it up. And you think you belong here? I don't think I belong anywhere, but your daughter asked me to come, so I came. My daughter, Richard said slowly, doesn't know what she wants. I think she does, Jack said evenly. I think she's just never had anyone listen. The room went silent. Richard stepped closer. His voice dropped, low, dangerous. My daughter doesn't need a mechanic. Jack met his gaze, did not look away. Maybe she just needed someone who showed up. Isabella felt something break open inside her. Courage, rage, freedom. She stepped between them. Enough. Her father looked at her, surprised. I'm done, Dad. I'm done pretending. I'm done being your pawn. I'm done living a life you designed. Isabella, no, you don't get to talk now. You get to listen. Richard's jaw clenched. I'm leaving the company. I'm starting my own foundation. And I'm going to help people. Real people. Not board members. Not investors. People. Jack watched her. Proud. Quiet. Ready to back her up if she needed it. Richard's face turned red. You'll lose everything. Isabella smiled. No, Dad. I'll finally have something. Richard Voss stared at his daughter, silent, calculating. Then he turned and walked out. No goodbye, no argument, just the sound of expensive shoes on marble floors. Isabella stood there, breathing hard. Her hands were shaking. Jack stepped beside her, did not touch her, just stood there, present. You okay? He asked quietly. She nodded, then shook her head, then laughed. A wild, relieved laugh. I have no idea. That's a start. 3 months later, the building was small, a renovated warehouse on the east side of the city. Nothing fancy, but it was hers. The sign above the door read, Wrong Call Foundation. Someone will always show up. Isabella stood outside, looking up at it, still could not believe it was real. Jack pulled up in his truck. Lila bounced out of the passenger seat. Miss Bella, she called, running over. Isabella caught her in a hug, lifted her up. Hey, little dragon, Lila giggled. Did you see? Daddy helped paint the sign. I did see. It's perfect. Jack walked over, hands in his pockets. She insisted on adding glitter to the letters. I had to talk her down. I wanted it to sparkle, Lila said seriously. It does sparkle, Isabella said, because you helped. Lila beamed. Inside, the space was organized chaos. Phones, computers, maps on the walls. A team of 5 people setting up stations. Isabella had used her trust fund, the one her mother had left her, the one her father could not touch. She had built something real. The foundation worked simple. Women in danger could call anytime, day or night. Someone would always answer. Someone would always come, Jack ran the response team. 3 drivers, all former military, all people who understood what it meant to show up. Ready for tomorrow? Jack asked. Tomorrow was the official launch. Press, donors, the whole thing. Nervous, Isabella admitted. You'll be great. She looked at him. I couldn't have done this without you. Yes, you could have. You just didn't have to. She smiled. Lila tugged on Isabella's sleeve. Miss Bella, can I tell you something? Of course. Lila leaned in close, whispered loudly. I'm glad you called us. Daddy needed a friend too. Isabella felt her throat tighten. She looked at Jack. He was smiling. That soft, quiet smile. Me too, Isabella whispered back. I'm really glad I called. Lila hugged her again. Tight. The kind of hug that said, you are part of us now. That evening, after Lila fell asleep on the couch in the office, Jack and Isabella stood outside. The city lights spread out before them. She loves you, you know, Jack said. Lila, she talks about you all the time. Isabella's eyes stung. I love her too. I love this, what we're building. Jack nodded. It's good work. They stood in comfortable silence. Then Isabella said, I got a letter from my father today. Jack glanced at her. Yeah? He's cutting me out of the will, officially. Nay, how do you feel about that? She thought about it, then smiled. Free. Jack smiled too. Good. He also said he's watching, waiting for me to fail. Then I guess we better not fail. We won't. She looked at him, really looked at him, this man who had shown up in the rain, who had stayed, who had believed in her when no one else did. Thank you, Jack. For what? For answering a wrong call. He shook his head. It wasn't wrong. It was exactly right. 1 year later, the Wrong Call Foundation had expanded. 3 locations, 24-hour hotline. Over 200 women helped. Isabella stood at the podium, a small crowd gathered. Donors, volunteers, press, and in the front row, Jack and Lila. A year ago, Isabella began, I made a phone call. I was scared, alone, and I dialed the wrong number. She smiled. Or at least I thought I did. Laughter rippled through the crowd. The man who answered that call didn't know me. He had no reason to help. He could have ignored it, gone back to sleep. But he didn't. He showed up, in the rain, in the middle of the night, and he changed my life. Her voice wavered. She steadied herself. He taught me something that night, that showing up matters, that being there for someone, even a stranger, can change everything. And that's what this foundation is built on, the belief that no one should face their darkest moment alone. She looked directly at Jack. So to the man who answered my wrong call, thank you for showing up, for staying, for believing I was worth the drive. Jack smiled, quiet, proud. Lila whispered loudly, that's my daddy. The crowd laughed. Isabella finished her speech. Ribbon was cut. Photos were taken. Later, when the crowd thinned, the 3 of them stood in front of the building. The sun was setting, golden light washing over everything. What do you think Mom would say? Lila asked, looking up at her father. Jack looked at Isabella, then at his daughter. I think she'd say we're doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing. Lila nodded, satisfied. Isabella knelt down, eye level with Lila. You know what, little dragon? What? Your daddy's superpower? It's real, and now it's helping a lot of people. Lila grinned. I told him. Isabella laughed, pulled her into a hug. Jack watched them, his daughter, his friend, his team, his family. He thought about that night, the rain, the call, the moment he decided to drive into the storm. Some people would call it luck. Some would call it fate. He called it exactly what it was, showing up. Sometimes the wrong call is exactly the right reason to start again. You never know who's waiting on the other end. You never know what one decision can change. So if someone calls, if someone needs help, show up, because the universe doesn't make mistakes. It just finds better ways to connect us. The camera pulls back. The building glows warm against the evening sky. Jack, Isabella, and Lila walk inside together. The sign above them reads, Someone will always show up. And they do. Subscribe if you believe fate always dials the right heart.